Story 1. I've always been fascinated by urban exploration. The thrill of stepping into places where time has stopped, where the walls tell stories, drew me in like a moth to a flame. On this particular day, I had my sights set on an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. It was a decaying structure, its once white walls now a sickly shade of gray. Vines snaked up its facade, clawing at broken windows like the skeletal hands of forgotten patients. The air around the hospital was thick with neglect, a heavy sense of unease settling over me as I approached. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. My flashlight flickered to life, casting a narrow beam into the darkness. The echoes of my footsteps followed me as I stepped through the broken doorway and into the hospital's dimly lit corridors. The first few rooms were empty, save for the occasional rusted gurney or shattered piece of equipment. The graffiti on the walls hinted at the hospital's sordid history, with cryptic messages and crude drawings adding to the unsettling atmosphere. I moved deeper into the building, my curiosity pushing me forward, despite the growing sense of dread. I turned a corner and found myself in a long hallway. The flickering light revealed doors on either side, most of them ajar. I peeked into each room, finding only debris and decay. But as I reached the end of the hallway, I noticed one door that was tightly shut. The handle was rusty, but I managed to turn it with a bit of effort. Inside, I was met with a peculiar sight. The room was filled with old, handwritten patient files, neatly stacked on a table in the center. A single window, covered in grime, allowed a faint sliver of light to filter in, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I picked up a file and flipped through it, my eyes scanning the yellowed pages. The information was mundane at first: patient names, dates of admission, medical histories, but then I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The photos. Each file contained a photo of a patient, and beneath each photo was a note about their disappearance. The dates on the files were from decades ago, yet the patients had vanished without a trace. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that the last file's date was just a few weeks before my visit. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a cold sensation that settled deep in my bones. I rummaged through the other files, finding more photos and more notes about disappearances. Some patients were elderly, others were children, but they all shared the same fate. No explanations, no clues, just empty spaces where they should have been. My heart raced as I glanced around the room, wondering if I was alone. A noise behind me made me jump. It was faint, like the creak of a floorboard, but it was enough to send me into a panic. I spun around, flashlight sweeping the room, but there was nothing there. My hands shook as I gathered a few of the files, shoving them into my backpack. I needed to get out of there fast. I retraced my steps, my pace quickening with each turn. The hospital's layout seemed different on the way back, as if the walls had shifted in my absence. I took a wrong turn and found myself in a dead-end corridor. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to lengthen, reaching for me like dark fingers. A door at the end of the corridor creaked open, and I froze. A figure stepped out, shrouded in darkness. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel their gaze, cold and unblinking. I backed away slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The figure didn't move, but I could hear their breathing slow, deliberate, almost rhythmic. I took a deep breath and sprinted back the way I came, my heart pounding in my chest. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, my footsteps echoing like a drumbeat. I burst through the broken doorway and into the daylight, gasping for air as I stumbled onto the overgrown path leading away from the hospital. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my backpack heavy with the files I had taken. As I sat in the driver's seat, I glanced back at the hospital, its decaying silhouette looming over the landscape. I knew I would never return to that place, not after what I had seen. But the files in my backpack, the photos of the vanished patients, would haunt me for the rest of my life. The mystery of their disappearances and the figure in the dark would be with me forever. Story 2. The trail through the forest was my escape from the noise of city life. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself among the towering trees and the whispers of the wind. On this particular day, I had ventured deeper into the wilderness than I ever had before, pushing past the usual hiking routes into the untouched heart of the forest. The further I went, the more isolated I felt. The trail narrowed, becoming little more than a thin ribbon of dirt snaking through the underbrush. The bird song that had accompanied me earlier faded, replaced by an eerie silence. I relished the solitude, the sense of being truly alone in nature. But as the shadows grew longer, a creeping unease settled over me. I continued hiking, keeping an eye on my compass to ensure I didn't stray too far off course. The trees grew thicker, their branches weaving together to form a dense canopy overhead. Sunlight filtered through in sporadic bursts, casting shifting patterns on the forest floor. It was beautiful, but there was something about the stillness that set me on edge. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I noticed something out of place. A splash of red against the muted greens and browns of the forest. I approached cautiously, my heart racing as I drew closer. It was a backpack, its once bright fabric now stained with dark, dried blood. My instincts told me to turn back, to leave whatever horrors lay ahead undiscovered. But curiosity overpowered fear, and I reached down to inspect the bag. The bloodied backpack was heavy, its contents shifting as I picked it up. I unzipped the main compartment and found fresh food inside: sandwiches, fruit, and a bottle of water. The food was still cold, as if it had been packed that morning. I checked the other pockets, finding a map and a small flashlight, but there were no signs of identification, nothing to tell me who this bag belonged to. The lack of footprints or signs of human presence made the situation even stranger. The trail had been pristine, untouched by any recent hikers. I looked around, expecting to see someone emerging from the trees, but there was no one. The forest was silent, save for the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. A chill ran down my spine. It didn't make sense. How could someone be out here with fresh food and leave without a trace? I stood there for a moment, the backpack in my hands, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to put as much distance between myself and the forest as possible. But something else, a morbid curiosity, kept me rooted to the spot. I decided to follow the trail a bit further, hoping to find some sign of the backpack's owner. As I walked, the forest grew darker, the trees seeming to close in around me. I kept my eyes peeled for any signs of movement, but the only thing I saw were the shifting shadows among the trees. The trail eventually led me to a small clearing. In the center, I saw a crude campsite, a makeshift tent made from a tarp, a smoldering fire pit, and a few scattered items. But there were no signs of life. The air around the campsite was heavy with the scent of smoke, but the fire had long since died out. I searched the area, finding a discarded jacket and a pair of hiking boots, but no people. The bloodied backpack grew heavier in my hands. I felt a wave of nausea as I realized that something terrible had happened here. The absence of people, the bloodied bag, and the fresh food had all pointed to something sinister. I backed away slowly, my pulse quickening with each step. I knew I needed to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But as I turned to go, I heard a sound, a low, guttural growl coming from the trees. It was faint, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The growl grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was making the sound was closing in on me. I broke into a run, the backpack bouncing against my back as I sprinted down the trail. The forest blurred around me, the branches whipping past my face as I fled. The growl followed me, growing louder with each step. I didn't stop running until I reached the trailhead, my legs trembling with exhaustion. I dropped the bloody backpack and stumbled into my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As I sped away from the forest, the growl faded into the distance, but the memory of the bloodied backpack and the campsite haunted me. I never returned to that forest, not after what I had experienced. The unanswered questions, the chilling growl, and the bloodied backpack, it was a story I would never forget, a reminder that the wilderness could hide dark and terrifying secrets. Story 3. Working late at the office had become a habit of mine. The quiet hours after everyone had left were peaceful, a chance to focus without the constant interruptions of the day. My office was on the top floor, and as the last one in the building, I often felt like I had the entire place to myself. It was just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard. That night, I was finishing up a report that was due the next morning. The clock on my desk blinked 11:43 p.m., the numbers casting a faint glow across my paperwork. I stretched, feeling the stiffness in my shoulders from hours of sitting, and decided to grab a coffee from the break room. As I walked down the dimly lit hallway, I noticed the eerie quiet. Usually I could hear the distant hum of the building's HVAC system or the occasional creak of the floorboards, but tonight it was as if the entire office was holding its breath. I reached the break room, the smell of stale coffee greeting me as I flicked on the light. The pot was empty, so I filled it with water and started a new brew. As I waited for the coffee to finish, I heard the sound of the elevator doors opening down the hallway. It was a soft, mechanical whir, followed by the gentle ding of the elevator arriving. I frowned, wondering who else could be in the building at this hour. I peered down the hallway, expecting to see someone step out of the elevator, but there was no one there. The doors were wide open, the empty elevator car sitting silently in the shaft. A chill ran down my spine as I walked toward the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I reached out to press the button to close the doors, but they slid shut on their own, the mechanical whirring filling the silence. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a glitch in the system. Elevators could be temperamental, and maybe it was just a random malfunction. I turned to head back to my office, but as I did, I noticed a light flickering at the end of the hallway. It was my boss's office, the light casting a faint glow through the frosted glass door. I knew I was the last one in the building, and my boss had left hours ago. Why was his office light on? I felt a surge of unease as I approached the door. The office was locked, as it always was when my boss wasn't there. I tried the handle, and it didn't budge. The light continued to flicker, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I knocked on the door, hoping for a response, but there was only silence. My heart raced as I peered through the frosted glass, trying to make out any shapes or movement inside. It was hard to see clearly, but I could make out a faint outline, like someone was sitting at the desk. I knocked again, louder this time, but there was still no answer. I took a step back, my mind racing with possibilities. Had my boss come back to the office without me noticing? Was someone else in there, perhaps a burglar or an intruder? I decided to call security, but when I pulled out my phone, I had no signal. The office was in a tall building, and sometimes the reception could be spotty, but this felt like more than a coincidence. I took a deep breath and decided to go back to my office to use the landline. As I turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper from behind the door. It was soft, almost inaudible, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I froze, straining to hear the words, but it was just a jumble of sounds, like a distant conversation. I didn't know what to do. My instincts told me to leave, to get out of the building and call for help from outside. But curiosity got the better of me, and I returned to my office to grab the spare key to my boss's door. I rummaged through my desk drawer, my hands trembling as I searched for the key. As I found it and turned to leave, I heard the elevator doors open again. The soft ding echoed through the hallway, and I knew I had to act quickly. I ran back to my boss's office, the key in hand, and unlocked the door. The light was still on, but the office was empty. The chair behind the desk was turned, as if someone had just left. Papers were scattered across the floor, and a coffee mug was overturned on the desk. The whispering grew louder, like it was coming from all around me. I felt a surge of panic as I backed out of the office, my eyes darting around the empty hallway. The elevator doors were still open, but the car was empty. I knew I had to leave, but something was holding me back, a sense that I needed to understand what was happening. I didn't wait to find out. I sprinted down the hallway, the whispering growing louder as I ran. The elevator was my only way out, but as I stepped inside, the doors slammed shut, the lights flickering before plunging me into darkness. The whispering was all around me now, a chorus of indistinct voices, each one filled with urgency and fear. The elevator descended, the walls creaking and groaning as if under pressure. When the doors finally opened at the ground floor, I stumbled out, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't look back as I ran out of the building and into the night. The whispering faded into the distance, but the sense of fear remained with me, a constant reminder that I had seen something I couldn't explain. I never stayed late at the office again, not after that night. The memory of the elevator, the whispering voices, and my boss's office light turning on without explanation haunted me. I knew there was something in that building, something that didn't belong, and I had no intention of finding out what it was.